when they left us all, they left us in a state of perpetual conflict as well. So that, we would be stuck in this ever sort of growing sort of sense of, problem. They just did not split Bharat to India and Pakistan. They did it everywhere, world over. Every colony the British or the Western powers left, they left them all in like sort of a perpetual state of conflict, so that they just never recover from either colonization or the sort of conflicts that they have to now face on a day-to-day basis. So I think that is key. And the second thing, of course, you're right to say that they have institutionalized colonization. It's actually funny how we look up to institutions like the United Nations, the United Nations Human Rights Council, when there are large conflicts across the world, as to thinking that they will empower us, that they will empower the world, and they will show direction when there is none in the world. But unfortunately, they're the very people who are causing these issues in the first place, and enabling institutions, enabling former colonial powers to make money off of it. You actually hit the nail on the head when you said this. And the sort of perpetual conflict not only gives them relevance on a daily basis, but also enables them to be in a negotiatory position where they can also flip in two or three things that maintain the global market forces. So I think it's very sinister in the way that they've sort of formulated all of these policies. They have formulated all of these organizations uh, to sort of mask the sense of righteousness, to mask the sense of justice from a common person, but at the same time cripple the rights of the common person in the grand scheme of things. And I think it's rather unfortunate that it's only now that we are beginning to realize the magnitude of what's going on. Very often I feel, Adityaji, that we find out about things long after the era of that particular sort of system of oppression is over. It's
No
only
longer
now
now.
that
No
we
longer. We are way ahead now. No longer.
I think it's debatable, Adityaji. I feel like, okay, uh, we realized sort of what colonization did to us in the 2000s, and what the UN did to us,
Rashmi,
what
I
the
was
UN
saying
did.
from the Sathology perspective, we have been highlighting in 10 years in advance now what they're going to do.
So congratulations to you on that. And I guess this is really important work, and how social media has actually aided in sort of enabling this sort of a interesting conversation. It's in the small things. It's as small as climate change. They brought in the whole concept of climate change. They brought in the Paris Agreement, they brought in the Kyoto Agreement before that. And then it's interesting how the many institutions which were formed as a result to sort of implement these protocols were private institutions formed by former United Nations employees. And they staked to make a lot of money from the kind of policies which were being made. Carbon crediting is another thing which people might have heard about it. I'm an energy systems engineer myself. And it's another very smart way of sort of doing and going about this sort of colonization, as to speak. uh, if I'm being completely honest, I feel like carbon crediting is a sort of a secondary attempt to colonize countries around the world, where under the guise of saving environment they want to take control of natural resources of different countries.
That's right.
And few African countries unfortunately have fallen prey to these sorts of of policies, because of corruption, because of greed, and because of real serious lobbying which happens from the West. And it all happens under the label of climate change. Under the label of climate change, there is active colonization that is happening of African countries. Their resources are now under a lot of under the control of a lot of private companies in the US, who claim to be saving the environment for them because they are not capable of taking care of it themselves. Can you imagine the goal?
I mean, you hit the. I think we'll have to do 10 shows on just climate change actually, because you totally understand what the actual plan is to repossess the territories and freely under the name of the UN banner of climate change, and then control the resources, like what exactly happening in New Caledonia, what happened in Diego Garcia. We all know what happened in Diego Garcia. A lot of uranium deposits were stolen and taken back to UK and USA. So, do you think that the leader of the collective thinking of the West is UK?
Well, I don't think it's the UK anymore, especially because of the sort of hole they've dug themselves into. And I think the center has definitely shifted. It shifted from the UK to the US a while ago, and I think it's even shifted from the US now. And I do believe that it's shifted to power centers which are privately owned at this point. It has a lot of actors which are not just intergovernmental but also, like, owners of large amounts of wealth, companies which, um, control quarter of the world's wealth. I think it's key actors in these circles now where the power center lies. And unfortunately, I do believe that UK is something of the past at this point. Because I think every system, no matter how robust and how conniving and how evil, they all have their own sort of process of degradation and downfall. And I think the mighty British Empire, at least, is on the decline. And if not anything, their economy is itself an indication of how things are. And if you go to London now, then um, inflation is sky high, electricity is almost unaffordable. So there's a whole proverb which goes, you can either eat or heat. You can't afford both. Either you can afford your electricity bills, that's heat your building, or you can eat food. So you have to pick one. So it's come to that now. So I don't genuinely believe that the power center is there anymore, and that, it's shifted more to other players, who key players who do have, their origins in the West.
In early part of my career, my base was London because I was told by my corporate. I was very new salesman in IT services and IT products, CRM especially. And I was when I first went to London, and when I saw the river Thames, I thought it was a big nala, Indian nala. It's like a big, grand Indian drainage system, canal. It's very small, and I was astonished that how. And I was based there, and many people in Britain know me very well because I used to go in Staines and many places over there, and I used to be wheeling and dealing with the who's and who of UK. And in that experience, what I found, there was an inherent disdain for the brown Hindu skin, not Muslim, not Christian, but Hindus especially. I especially observed that. But at that time, I was in my very young guy, out to conquer the world. And I noticed everything because I used everything that they said in my sales I pitches actually. So if they loved beer, I use beer for my sales activities. And I never drank it at that time. I was never drinking, and I was not part of any of those their habits. But still, I had that experience. So, do you think that there is an inherent look down syndrome of theirs against Hindus? Even though externally they may not say it, you said it very correctly. They camouflage very well.
Well, Aditya, I think there is a fundamental hatred of Abrahamics towards non-Abrahamics. The typical thing of non-indigenous towards the indigenous, of the non sort of murti worshipping communities towards the murti worshipping communities. Because I refuse to call a murti an idol. So I think that that sort of disdain, that sort of hatred, and that sort of bigotry, if I may, is very deep seated, and it goes beyond sort of the niceties or political correctness or political leanings or even economy. I think this bigotry is deeply religious in nature. It's very sort of old and ancient in nature. And we really underplay the sort of origins of this because we are sort of led to believe that many of these institutions in the West now are agnostic or atheist or secular for that matter. But they're not. They're more religious than we can ever imagine, and very rigorous in that way, and very like puritanical in that way, that they do not tolerate anything other than what they believe in. um, I didn't know when I went to study at Oxford. I didn't know that Oxford was actually formally um, a collection of different, churches that came together to sort of impart religious education, and that even today every college has its own in-house church. So a small town of Oxford has 50 plus churches because every college has its own chapel. So education in itself has religious basis. The oldest school at Oxford is the Oxford Divinity School, and it still teaches that the earth is flat because it teaches religion from an Abrahamic sense. And nobody calls them intolerant or or sort of devolved, or a populace with a lot of prejudice or something like that, because they have more than 50% of the wealth that they unfairly hoarded to substantiate those claims. So nobody is going to call them out. But here, even if we claim that we knew that earth was spherical back in the day, and that we were more advanced in science and technology, and we were, as you say, we were based on mythology and not on mythology, th- they just won't believe us and they'll make fun of us. So I just feel that this bigotry is deeper than we give it credit, and that it has religious basis, and it is something we are sort of attuned to underplaying because of how we've been educated over and over to assume that religion doesn't play a huge factor in the Western ecosystem, and that it's very sort of Bharatiya in nature, and that they're more secular and tolerant as compared to us, but it's the other way around. And that bigotry is so deep seated that it comes out as pure hatred, but it is masked as different things, as racism, as this, as that. But unfortunately, I think even we've resorted to using Western labels to categorize what's going wrong and why we are being treated so badly. I think it's way beyond racism. I think it has its basis in bigotry.
Totally right. Totally get it actually. And anyone who has lived in the West can feel it today. That Indian Americans, whatever they are, Vivek Ramaswamy was rejected because he's a Hindu. Period. The best candidate America ever got was rejected because he's a Hindu, and that's why he could not stand for presidential run. Vivek Ramaswamy may disagree with me, but that's a fact. And but this is America, the land of free. And free from who? Settlers declared independence against the Church of England. So they got their freedom from Church of England, King James. And later on, King James III actually made Commonwealth in USA. So Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, these are all Commonwealth states within the United States of America. Very few people know that. Now, okay, it's coming to the next point. And I have my brain is exploding with questions right now. And believe me, for the audience, I have not prepared any questions for her. So she's asking as I'm asking. She doesn't know what the next question is going to be. So
Yeah.
it's very natural conversation. So my next question is like these. So is USA a colony of Great Britain officially? Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and all these countries.
Well, you can't call it a colony anymore. I think it's just an extension of the United Kingdom because it's a settler colony, right? Most of them sort of when they settle, they increased. All of the white people that you see in America, in New Zealand, in Australia, are all British. They all have European base is there, either British, they're either French, German, from Netherlands. So they're not, they're not indigenous to America. So the poor indigenous people, in fact, are suffering even today, because of what happened. So I don't think it's a colony anymore. I just feel like it's an extension
I
of the
want
empire.
I I want my viewers to go search Christy Noem, Governor of South Dakota, and how the tribal nations have refused her entry into the tribal nations, and that's a court case going on. So the US gave a promise to Native Americans that they will honor after pushing them in reservations, that they will not enter the reservations. And reservations are one of the worst territories people can push you in. It's like a jail, open jail, and it's still going on. So please do search it out. Yes, continue, please, Rashmi.
Yeah, so I mean, when it's a settler colony, all you've done is you've basically conquered, occupied. So I would like to call it a continuous occupation. The word colonization would be disservice to the sort of suffering and to the legacy of Native Americans, to the native sort of New Zealanders. There's this whole community right there, which is native to that land, and now they're
Maori,
actually fighting for rights. And
Maoris.
yeah, the Maori people, they're actually fighting for their rights and everything. And what happened to the indigenous people in Australia? They were drugged, they were restricted to these they were restricted to like closed jails, and they were declared as unstable and violent and whatnot. And what happened to them? I think, for that matter, India is really lucky that we don't have as many settler coloniza- colonizers, so it didn't end up becoming a extended occupation. I think, in that sense, even South Africa also had a lot more people staying back, but I think in Bharat, when they left, they all like really went away, and we were really independent. But everywhere else, it was just occupation, and an ultimate usurping and sort of changing of the entire demography, culture, food, and everything. And I think it's the most unfortunate thing. So you can't even call it colonization, you just have to call it an extended occupation.
Absolutely right. And what I think in the global south, if the any of the our supporters are listening and they can send it to Jay Shankar, then the south, global south must include native indigenous communities of the world still occupied as an independent entity from each country, because that will really serve the purpose of giving them rights, giving them basic what do you call it, respect, because they're all looking for that. uh, my one of my next question comes in. You already mentioned in the beginning the student bodies
Mm-hmm.
in Oxford and in the Western universities, and you must have really seen that a Hindu organization is automatically registered by the students, but their funding is not there. Usually, funding is self-driven, but most of the other groups, they get funding from other sources, from their churches and from the other places, and that's how the vibrancy is there. Even the Islamic groups get their funding from many other sources, especially the Hindu bodies don't get funding. What do you have to say on that, or I am wrong?
Well, Aditya, you're absolutely right. In fact, I think there are a bunch of student societies which are actually indirectly funded by their embassies, which is actually morally very wrong. But it does happen, and I've seen it happen. I've seen the Pakistani embassy like actively, indirectly fund a lot of student organizations to carry out their agenda and whatnot. And also through religious institutions, the sort of global chain of religious institutions, um, they also independently do fund these things. But unfortunately, the Hindu students are left on their own. But I think it's very interesting that not all Hindu student organizations are what they claim to be. There are lots of, sort of Hindu organizations, just a name, which operate under the guise of a decoy to actually derail the entire Hindu movement. In fact, at Oxford, I encountered one such organization, which was supposed to be the Oxford Hindu Society, and it was very strange, as it was not even registered with the university. And it went on to claim that there's no Hindu phobia, that there's no Hindu hatred, and so on and so forth, whilst there was a faculty who was clearly hollering in writing that Oxford is not ready for a Hindu president. So there was actually proof in writing that the entire situation was very Hinduphobic. But they were defending this situation, leading to many questioning what really was going on. And I do believe that the sort of lack of appropriate funding has created space for a lot of decoy organizations funded by anti-India, anti-Hindu elements, which sort of fill up this space. So unfortunately, the lack of funding has created alternative channels, which then go on to set agendas which are very sort of counterproductive and very dangerous to the community and their goals.
So you hit the nail over there in terms of the university funding and other things. The one of the things which I see with the Hindu student associations as well as the other Hindu groups is, you correctly said that they have been infiltrated by many so-called Hindu named organizations, but they are actually not doing the work of for the Hindu cause. They won't discuss the Shastra, or they won't even talk about politics also. Keep away from politics, and try to follow the student groups in a pure sense of the way. But most of the groups are religious in nature. So when you look at the Western template for uh, teaching South Asian studies, and we all know in the name of South Asian studies that they are trying to negate Hindu culture, our and call it a mythology, which we strongly oppose. Purana and Mahabharata, Ramayana, in my books, I've proved how real they are. And myself, I'm convinced. I don't have to need any other person to convince me. And the whole program is designed to show, like for example, Harvard Hindu Studies. The dean is Francis Clooney. I don't know whether he's still there or not. And Francis Clooney he wrote a translation of Ramanujacharya's work. 3 steps he wrote, and completely with an Abrahamic Christian mindset. He's in fact apologizing and trying to include the Hindu principles or Ramanujacharya's conversations into Christianity, almost doing that. And it's called inculturation in a very higher standard way. And the Indian universities want to validate themselves through Harvard. And we all know Harvard is a plagiarism based society, and they don't have anything on their own. So I can openly say that, and I can challenge them if they want to debate with us in any time. We are in San Diego, they are in wherever they are. So what do you think? What is the counter when the Indian universities actually perpetuate this nonsense, and also Indian corporates fund them? I have records of funding, and Rajiv Malhotra ji has done a wonderful work in his book, Snakes in the Ganga, where he has actually documented the funding of each of the things that he has done. These guys have done. What is the answer to that? What is the solution?
Well, Aditya I think firstly it's very important for everybody to understand how these sort of top 10, top 20 universities did become the top 10 universities. I can, give a small example about Oxford. So, Oxford is ranked number one in the world right now, according to the sort of Times survey and so on and so forth. The Henry, I think Henry the Fifth or Henry the Eighth, one of them, one of the Henrys, who's the King of England. Um, he was, I think, reigning around the time that Oxford was established and was a couple of 100 years old already. And at that time, the sort of education destination for everybody in Europe, including English people, was to go to this university in Paris. So that was the whole like thing. And everybody used to go to Paris to this one particular institution that I can't recall the name of. But then he had this rule. He created an active ban that English students cannot go abroad to study for almost 200, 300 years. It went on, the ban. And due to the ban, within 200, 300 years, the university was actually able to rise up to the standard that it did. And Aditya, don't you think if we had a ban only just for maybe two generations spanning say 25 years, 50 years, don't you think IITs would be the best universities in the world? We are losing our best minds, and that's the only reason why our universities are struggling in the ranking, in the global sort of ranking. So I think that's point A. We need to really, really understand what is the history of these universities and how they continue to sort of top these charts. And I think the how they continue to top these charts brings me to the second point as to the entire ranking process itself. It's rigged. So they make the rules and then they decide they're first. It's almost like you decide the rules for the game and then you decide to compete yourself. So there's a clear conflict of interest because you clearly know what the sort of judgment parameters are. You know the loopholes, you've had the time to study all of it, so you clearly know how to come first. So normally judges themselves do not participate in the competition, but here it's I'm the judge and I'm the competitor, so I'm going to be number one. I think that's the second sort of flaw with this ranking system that we have. um, I think it's the two of these factors, the sort of inability of Indian institutions to really see these institutions for what they are, A, and B, the sort of, this accumulated colonial mindset that everything Western is superior, everything white is amazing, that then like sort of propels us to accept everything that they teach. My entire sort of plank for Planck as a manifesto for my election at the University of Oxford was actually decolonization, because I knew this. I knew that whatever syllabus is taught at Oxford is something that is parroted across the world. It's like a pyramid, you do one thing at the top and then it comes top down. So I thought the only way to stop it is to actually change the syllabus here. So my entire sort of shtick at the university, the manifesto was, okay, if I become president, then we're going to have a consultation that actually changes the entire syllabus, and that the biased sort of narrative of history is stopped, and that we actually learn history for what it is. And I felt that then only would there be like sort of a pyramid change. But I think I was too naive to think that winning an election and having this plank would be actually enough to bring the change, because what happened afterwards is that they knew that they had to bring me down, otherwise, I mean, these changes would happen. So yeah, I think it was just a combination of all of this. And that's what a Hindu in Oxford is all about, because it actively speaks about how really these sort of nexuses operate, how these syllabuses operate, and how unfortunately a small school in a small town in an interior part of Bharat is also impacted by the sort of misinformation and fallacy that these elite so-called institutions spread in the name of education, and how drastically it impacts the worldview of that little child learning in that small town, their sense of self-worth and what they decide to do with the rest of their lives. It's actually very heartbreaking.